Commander Vonzer turned his attention to the next target on the invasion map, a vast, isolated landmass to the south, known to the humans as the Australia. The Zilani fleet descended upon Australia with a calculated precision that had brought them victories across the galaxy. Commander Vonzer, still grappling with the unexpected resistance in the jungles, viewed this new land with cautious optimism. From orbit, Australia appeared desolate, with its vast stretches of red desert and sparse vegetation. To the Zilani, it seemed like a barren, uninhabited region, easy to conquer, ideal for establishing a stronghold away from the chaotic battlefronts. Upon landing, the Zilani forces immediately set to work. Drones fanned out across the arid landscape, mapping the terrain and scanning for any signs of human activity. The initial reports were promising. The region appeared devoid of significant human presence, and the alien machines moved unhindered across the dusty plains. Yet, despite the apparent ease of their advance, an unsettling silence hung over the operation. There were no sounds of wildlife, no signs of life at all, only the relentless, searing heat and the endless expanse of the outback. The Zilani, who had conquered worlds of ice and fire, assumed they could endure this new environment. But as the sun rose higher in the sky, the temperature soared to levels that even their advanced cooling systems struggled to manage. The ground itself seemed to radiate heat, turning their metal exoskeletons into ovens. Machines began to overheat, shutting down in the middle of critical operations, leaving the troops vulnerable and exposed. As night fell, bringing with it a bone-chilling cold that contrasted sharply with the day's inferno, the Zilani began to encounter the true inhabitants of this land. It started with a patrol that failed to report back. Only their charred remains were found, the cause of death unknown. Then came the swarms of insects, far more aggressive than any they had faced before, biting through armor and injecting toxins that paralyzed even the hardiest of their soldiers. The Zilani soon realized that Australia was not as empty as it seemed. The land was teeming with life, hostile, resilient life that had adapted to survive in this extreme environment. Venomous snakes slithered through their camps, striking with lethal precision. Spiders the size of a Zilani's hand crawled into their machinery, short-circuiting critical systems. Even the plants seemed to be conspiring against them, with sharp thorns and toxic sap that burned through their protective gear. Vonzer, observing the reports from the safety of his command center, felt a cold dread settle in his chest. Australia was proving to be a battlefield unlike any they had faced before. The land itself was the enemy, and it fought with a ferocity that was both brutal and indifferent. The humans had been elusive so far, but Vonzer knew they were watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. He could sense their presence in the shifting shadows and the eerie silence that followed every attack. As the days wore on, the Zilani began to falter. Their technology, which had seen them through countless wars, was failing them here. Drones fell from the sky, their circuits fried by the intense heat. Troops suffered from dehydration, their bodies unable to acclimate to the harsh conditions. The invaders, once so confident in their superiority, were now struggling just to survive. In the midst of this turmoil, Vonzer ordered a strategic withdrawal, hoping to regroup and find a new approach. But the retreat was slow, hampered by the unforgiving terrain and constant harassment from Australia's deadly wildlife. The commander knew they had underestimated this land, just as they had underestimated the humans. Australia was not merely a battleground. It was a crucible, a place where only the strongest could endure. As the last of his troops pulled back, Vonzer couldn't shake the feeling that Australia had been testing them, and that they had failed. The Zilani were invaders, but here, in this land of extremes, they were the ones who had been outmatched. And somewhere in the darkness, the humans were preparing for their next move, emboldened by the knowledge that their land was more dangerous than any alien force could ever be. The Zilani, once masters of countless worlds, now found themselves ensnared in a relentless battle for survival. Commander Vonzer, his confidence shaken by the unexpected ferocity of Australia, had ordered a temporary retreat. But even as they withdrew, the land refused to release its grip on the invaders. Australia was not just a hostile environment. It was a living nightmare, one that seemed intent on breaking the will of every Zilani soldier who dared to tread its soil. As the Zilani regrouped, they faced an unyielding enemy, the land itself. Day after day, their troops were battered by blistering heat, sudden sandstorms, and a barrage of venomous creatures. The relentless sun bleached the landscape, sapping the strength of the Zilani and rendering their once gleaming armor dull and brittle. Their technology, so reliable on other worlds, was now a liability. Cooling systems malfunctioned under the strain. Energy shields flickered and failed, and their once efficient weaponry became cumbersome and unreliable in the shifting sands. Vonzer, desperate to regain control, ordered a new strategy. He deployed specialized reconnaissance units, designed to adapt quickly and endure harsh conditions. These units ventured deeper into the outback, seeking a foothold in this unforgiving land. But what they encountered defied all logic. The terrain shifted beneath their feet, as if alive, guiding them into traps laid not by humans, but by the environment itself. Quicksand swallowed entire squads without warning, while hidden chasms opened up, consuming their armored vehicles in an instant. The wildlife, too, grew bolder. Giant saltwater crocodiles, silent and unseen, lurked in the murky rivers, launching sudden, lethal attacks on any Zilani who ventured too close. Birds of prey, massive and swift, dive-bombed their camps, their razor-sharp talons tearing through armor like paper. Even the tiniest creatures became threats, ants that swarmed in the millions, overwhelming their defenses, and jellyfish whose stings paralyzed soldiers on the spot. The psychological toll on the Zilani was immense. They were warriors, trained to face any foe with cold precision, yet here they were reduced to prey. The land mocked their every effort to establish control, turning their own strengths against them. Morale plummeted as soldiers began to crack under the pressure, haunted by the realization that Australia was not merely a battlefield, but a force of nature that defied their understanding. And then, amidst the chaos, the humans struck. They moved like phantoms, using the land's natural defenses to their advantage. Guerrilla tactics became their weapon of choice, swift, brutal attacks followed by immediate retreats into the unforgiving wilderness. The Zilani, disoriented and demoralized, struggled to respond. Every advance they made was met with fierce resistance, not just from the humans, but from the land itself, which seemed to rise up in defense of its inhabitants. Vonzer, watching his forces dwindle, began to understand the true horror of Australia. This was a place where survival itself was a victory, where the weak were mercilessly culled, and only the most adaptable could hope to thrive. The Zilani, for all their technological superiority, were ill-equipped for such a test. They had come to conquer, but now they were simply trying to endure. In the dead of night, as the outback's cold winds howled through the Zilani encampments, Vonzer faced the grim reality of their situation. Australia was not a land to be tamed. It was a crucible of death, and they were being forged or broken within it. The Zilani were learning a harsh lesson, one that had eluded them across all their conquests. Not all battles could be won with strength alone. Some required a different kind of endurance, a resilience that could only be born from true understanding of the enemy and the land. As Vonzer prepared to issue his next orders, he knew one thing for certain. If they could not find a way to adapt, Australia would become the grave of the Zilani invasion. The land had tested them, and so far they had been found wanting. Vonzer, though battered, was not yet broken. Australia had shown its hand, but the Zilani still had one final card to play. The decision to retreat weighed heavily on Commander Vonzer. The Zilani had never before conceded defeat, yet Australia had brought them to the brink. Their forces, once formidable and seemingly invincible, were now reduced to a fractured and demoralized remnant. The land had broken them in ways they had never imagined, and Vonzer knew that to continue the fight here would be to court annihilation. As the last of the Zilani ships lifted off from the scorched Australian soil, Vonzer's mind was a storm of conflicting thoughts. The land below, with its endless deserts, treacherous wildlife, and unforgiving climate had humbled him. Australia was a place where the environment itself was an active participant in the battle, a force that neither technology nor military might could conquer. The Zilani had learned this lesson the hard way. The retreat was a bitter pill to swallow. It was not just a physical toll, the loss of soldiers, equipment, and resources, but the psychological impact that gnawed at Vonzer's core. The Zilani prided themselves on their ability to dominate any world they set their sights on, yet here, they had been outmatched by the very elements they had so arrogantly dismissed. The humans, too, had proven to be far more than just the primitive species they had first appeared. Their knowledge of the land, their resilience, and their ability to turn the environment into a weapon had shattered the Zilani's expectations. As the fleet ascended into the dark void of space, leaving Australia behind, Vonzer knew that this failure would have far-reaching consequences. The other Zilani commanders, spread across Earth's various continents, would be watching closely, learning from the disaster that had unfolded in the southern landmass. The humans, once considered a mere nuisance, were now a threat to be taken seriously. The Zilani's conquest of Earth was no longer a certainty. It was a question, one that hung over them like a shadow. In the silence of his command chamber, Vonzer reflected on the events that had led to this point. He had underestimated not just Australia, but Earth as a whole. This planet, with its diverse and deadly environments, was a true Deathworld, and the Zilani had walked into it blind. The humans, with their intimate knowledge of every inch of their world, had an advantage that no amount of alien technology could negate. Yet, despite the retreat, Vonzer was not ready to concede total defeat. Australia had been a crucible, a place that tested the limits of the Zilani's resolve. It had forced them to confront their weaknesses and to recognize the strengths of their adversaries. But Vonzer was a survivor, and he knew that survival required adaptation. The Zilani would learn from this experience, would adapt their strategies, and would return with a deeper understanding of the challenges they faced. But for now, as the fleet regrouped in the relative safety of orbit, Vonzer could not shake the feeling of unease that clung to him. Australia had been more than just a failed conquest. It had been a revelation. The Zilani, for all their power, were not invincible. They were vulnerable, and Earth, with its countless dangers, had exposed that vulnerability. As the stars stretched out before him, Vonzer made a silent vow. The Zilani would not forget what had happened here. They would return, but next time, they would be prepared. They would come not as conquerors, but as survivors, ready to face the full wrath of a death world and its inhabitants. But even as he steeled himself for the challenges ahead, a part of Vonzer wondered if the Zilani were truly capable of overcoming what they had encountered. Australia had been a crucible, but had it forged them into something stronger, or had it revealed the limits of their strength? Only time would tell, and as the fleet moved on, leaving Earth's most dangerous land behind, Vonzer knew that this was just the beginning of a much longer, much more perilous journey.